Goeienaand en welkom, baie dankie dat julle ingeskakel het hier by Klipkop, in 'n baie onvoorbereide uitsending. Kom ons kyk. Ek sal sê dit is offisieel donker, een van die dae sal julle sien as ek live gaan. Ek wonder as ek op die regte tyd live gegaan het, of mense dan nog kon gesien het, is lig buite. Ek dink dit mag dalk die geval wees, mense somer is amper hier, so ek is opgewonde. Ek is besig om my tuintjie voor te berei vir om allerlei soorte lekkernye te groei. In laasweekse episode het ons begin kyk na die oorlog wat uitgebreek het tussen ons en die Kaapmans. En soos wat dit vir my gelyk het op daardie stadium, is dit asof ons die oorlog, besig is om die oorlog te verloor. Vanaand gaan ons kyk wat gebeur. Ek wil eers 'n lousie vir die mense in die kletskolom. Jo, ek is baie laat vanaand, die hele kwartier. Ek het nou die dag, dus dan kyk ek ook 'n ander bekende Afrikaanse pseudo-Afrikaanse livestreamer. Hy praat Afrikaans by die huis en by die werk, maar as hy live gaan dan is dit alles in Engels. In elk geval, nou sien ek die ouete, ek gaan nie name noem, jy weet, en anders versprei ek ons nou alweer volke en nuus en so aan. Hoekom is jy so 'n klipkop? Maar ek sien die ou in die begin van die livestream het hy sy koffie by hom. En soos die livestream aangaan, nou is dit al 45-50 minute in die livestream in. Sien ek die ou vat sy koffie en jy weet, hy sluk so en hy maak hy gesig. Maar nou moet jy in ag neem, hierdie livestream is nou al amper 'n uur in die gang. Hy koffie is ijskoud. Sal jy 'n koffie so gesluk het, wat ijskoud is so? Nee, het mos warm koffie wat jy so sluk. As jy 'n idee het van wie ek praat, of as jy ander mense volg, wat ook koffie drink op livestreams, kyk 'n bietjie so 40 minute in die show in, hoe sluk hulle koffie, en kyk heel aan die begin van die show, of daar actually stoom uit hulle koffie uitkom. Ek is redelik oortuig, daar's geen koffie daarin nie, dis alles 'n eye blind, net soos hulle stories, liegstories en eye blinds is. Baie van die kere, nie altyd nie, baie van die kere. Ek sê goeienaand aan Mike Simpson, wat heel eerste in die kletskolom is. Ek is laat en ek praat 'n klomp nonsens ook in die begin. As ook RJJ. Ek het actually 'n eentjie gelaai voor ek live gegaan het. Kom ek sê, ons begin met 'n eentjie break. Jan van Riebeeck, ons bondgenoot uit die Laaglande. Goedenavond, Jan van Riebeeck. Okay, RJJ het ek alweer gesê, Domina Morgul is hier so. Goeienaand Domina, dis nou jou gunsteling deel van die boek, wanneer ons begin 'n lood gooi. Futzarko, hallo. Sien hy die Chad emoji het hy gestuur, die Chad emoji met 'n groot snor en 'n baard. Christo Deel is ook hier so, goeienaand Christo Deel, dankie dat jy ingeskakel het. As ook Finnie Simpson, goeienaand Finnie Simpson. Hy Swart is ook hier so, goeienaand. En vir wie het ek gemis? Christo D sê, ons moet geëerd voel, man skeer voor ons om sien. Date night, dis kerk toe gaan, jy skeer jouself maar skoon voordat jy kerk toe gaan, dis aan kerkie by Klipkop. Is my desktop audio af, ja. Dan Bebop Williams, my genade mense, wat gaan aan vanaand hier? Ek sien geen Klipkop nie, hier sit ek aan voor jou in lewende lywe. Bebop Williams vra of ek my tande geborsel het. Ek het inderdaad, kan jy ruik? Wie is dit? Al die e-celebs laat my lag. Gee net aandag as jy weer livestreams kyk. Die manne wat so sit en koffie drink. Hulle sit en drink water. Ons moet seker nou met die boek begin. Ek het nou klaar nonsens gepraat. Hoe was julle naweke? Alright. Ek het niks, man, hier is dinge aan my kant aan die gang. Ek weet, ek het laasweek se episode het ek gesien, Hierso is nog bitter baie wat moet kom, omtrent 'n hele episode. Toe ek niks gelees vandag, ek het my tyd spandeer op ander goed. Ek het vir julle afgeskeep, ek vra grootliks om verskoning. Maar ek het laasweek het ek so baie gewerk, dat het genoeg was om 2 episodes, wag, dis nie hierdie boekie, om so omdraai. Is dit die Romeinse Cabernossi? Ek weet nie. Ja, waar was ons? Oorlog. Okay, hier is my boekmerk. Episode 43. Kom ons sit gou hierdie kameruitjie ook voor my. Ja, die mense wat na die tyd kyk, julle weet mos hoe om te skiep. Double tap net aan die regterkant van jou skerm as jy verder vorentoe wil skiep. Tap hom soms so 6 keer. Dan skiep jy lekker vorentoe. Okay, wag. Ek moet hierdie kamera nou heel oor opstel. As julle wil sien wat ek wil doen. Caring is sharing. Kyk, ek het even my Metallica t-shirt aan vir kerkaand. Nou moet ek eers hierdie ou mooi opstel. Dat julle kan sien hoekom ek julle tyd so mors. Baie swak voorbereid. En as hy so half gegrip, hy moet so 45 grade staan omtrent, weet ek. Okay, daar staan hy nou. Nou moet ek sy beentjies oopvlek. Sagkens. Blaas die boek skoon, ek moet my ander bedlampie loop aansit, ek is maar cheap, ek het nie een van die lekker groot ligte nie, ek het 'n bedlampie aan elke kant, dat julle my kan sien in stereo. Allee! Nou is die mooie kant van my gesig ook verlig. Klipkop was busy met die girls. Ek skeer nou eers, Mike. Ek skeer nou eers. Die naaste wat ek in 'n girl kom is hier op die Klipkop show. Julle is almal my girlfriends. Hoe lyk julle daai? Girlfriends en boyfriends, sommer die hele toetie. Jy het ons 'n lekker nuwe jaar gehou hierso. See boy. Ek kan nie eens onthou wie daar was nie. My streker. Kyk hier. Okay. Die kameraatjie moet net even so staan. So 'n bietjie afbuig. Net nog 'n bietjie sak. Okay, ek is nou met julle. Dan, hel. Jy sien, dis nou 'n probleem as hy sy balans verloor. Dan maak hy so, ek moet die voorste beentjies 'n bietjie langer maak. Dan staan hy so effens agtertoe. Nou hoop ek hier vanaf kan ons hom nou benader. Alright. Sit hom op Klipkop front. Nee, desktop. Properties, configure video. Camera control, focus. Ek dink so 20, 25, 30. Oh, wag, raak nou te veel. Ja, ek dink daai is perfek. Okay, ons het laaste. Waar het ons geëindig? Met die lokval wat misluk. Jy sien, op die oomblik is dit so half 'n gorilla oorlog wat aan die gang is. Want dan val die kooi aan, die Kaapmans, dan dryf hulle 'n klomp vee weg, dan verdwyn hulle en hulle is wat is die regte woord, vlugvoetig, om gevang te word. En daar is al 'n ou vermoor met 'n assegaai, en jy weet, dit is oorlog, maar dit is gorilla oorlog. Dit is presies wat dit is. Ek het hierdie stukkie gemerk as gul vir mekaar. Moet druk nie hierdie kameraatjie. Kan ek hom nog? Ag, ek is seker julle almal kan saamlees. Dit is beter. Dit is nou op die 3de Junie 1659. Cold windy weather in the morning with clouds coming from the northwest, slight rain. The commander and company were out for the purpose mentioned in the resolution taken yesterday. Kom kyk gou na die resolusie. Okay, so dis nou waar die lokval misluk het. En dan sê hulle hier, so it has also been decided to add 4 nimble slaves armed with assegais to the above soldiers to overtake some of the Hottentots in flight so that some of them can be captured alive. Okay, so hulle het nou 'n span saamgestel om hierdie ouens te vang. Dis nou maar net weer, hulle gaan nou nog 'n lokval probeer. The herdsman told them that they had seen the said Hottentots still at the Bosheuvel, who had hailed them and spoken to them from a distance, remaining out of firing range. Duman was at the lead of this group, together with other known scoundrels. They called out that they did not wish to do the Dutch any harm, but merely wanted their cattle. So hulle, ek weet nie hoe lekker werk het is, ons ook net jou vee, en daar gaan nie, ons wil julle nie skade aan doen nie, tensy julle self gaan verdedig. Amongst others encountered on the way was the freeburger Casper Brinkman, who had been robbed of all his livestock, 19 head of cattle and 67 sheep. He reported that he too had been in conversation with these robbers from a distance and that they had asked him whether he had obtained other cattle from the commander, for if so, they would soon make off with these as well and take them off to their encampment. This they have concealed so well and at such a distance away that at present we have the greatest difficulty in finding it. We shall therefore have to watch out all the more carefully so as to lay hands on some of these rogues. Then we shall make them show us the way so that we can then assail them there in a way that will give them a good fright. This is obviously essential. Dan, okay, die was 'n skip gewees, die zeilen, ek sê hy vertrek, maar hy vertrek nog nie heeltemal nie, die wind is nie lekker nie, en kyk nou, hier gaan nou 1, 2, 3 dae verby. Wacht, hier by nommer 7 sê hulle tog, our men could do nothing to the marauding Hottentots, neither could the Hottentots do anything to our people. The whole week our expeditions against them and their attempts upon our cattle have been unsuccessful. With the coming of fine weather, we trust that we shall come face to face with them, and may the Lord be on our side. Nou hier vat hulle nou nog 'n resolusie. Woensdag is 'n biddag. Ek gaan nou nie deur hierdie hele resolusie lees nie, net die hooftrekke. It has been decided that in the future for a service of intercession and prayer shall be held every Wednesday afternoon at 4 o'clock, so that by prayers and supplication we may avert the wrath of God from us. Hier is wel vir my 'n bevestiging dat hulle is nie in beheer van die situasie nie. En hulle soek nou, jy weet, so half, hulle vra vir goddelike ingryping hierso. Want hulle weet nie wat om te maak nie. So die storie is genuine, dit is so erg, jy weet. Hulle weet nie wat om te maak nie. Okay, hier gaan die zuile nou, hy gaan nou. En daar kan ons nou hierso ook sien, the afternoon the first prayer meeting was held with the object specified in the above resolution. Baie offisieel. Okay, uiteindelik daar gaan die zuile nou uit. Hendrik Boom word beroof. Nou, Hendrik Boom was die ou wat sterk gevriet was. Hy gesê, ek bly net hier, so ek sal nie skuif nie. Want ek weet, hy het lekker geld gemaak by die maatskappy en hy het al daai geld gespandeer om vir hom 'n manor house daar bo te bou. En hy gaan dit nie laat gaan nie. Nou hierso is sy storie. The commander, the fiscal Balkema, and one other person went out on horseback accompanied by 8 soldiers. When they had gone a good half-hour's journey from the fort, they learned that about a quarter of an hour before, approximately 20 Hottentots who are well known to us and who were led by Duman, had robbed the free burger Hendrik Boom of all 30 of his cattle, both young and old, and of 34 sheep. This had happened while the animals were grazing near the Nook-up on the slopes of the Windberg. Die Windberg is Duivels Piek. Under the care of 3 men, one armed with a musket and the other with short flintlocks. One of these men had been wounded in the shoulder, one merely had his sleeve torn, and the third was killed by 5 assegai wounds. Ek dink ek het vooruit gespring. Hierso is die sterfte van die assegai wonde. We thought we might overtake the Hottentots with the horses, but they had driven their booty over the flats so quickly that no glimpse from them could be caught at all. Thus, long after dark, the commander returned home without having achieved anything in this regard, but he had given orders here and there and stationed men at various points to see if they could capture them unawares, or by night on any of those routes along which they are obliged to pass, for they know how to hide themselves in all sorts of places, and when they see few men on guard, and that they have a good chance, they steal and drive away the cattle. All this is largely the fault of the free burghers themselves, and especially in the case of this Hendrik Boom, for contrary to our instructions issued in these dangerous times, each of them always wants to graze his cattle too far away from his neighbors. In fact, they even make the soldiers who are given to each of them for their protection do the same. If it were not for this, their numbers would be adequate for combined defense, as 10 of the company's soldiers have been assigned to them, and they themselves can muster 10 men, a total of 20, besides the 6 herdsmen in charge of the company's sheep and plough oxen. If therefore they had grazed their cattle within musket range of one another, they would never have suffered this loss. But each seems to prefer following his own inclination rather than the wise instructions issued, as a result of which Hendrik Boom in particular has lost his cattle and sheep today. His grain and dairy farming have also been utterly ruined. May God amend. Ek wil net goed duidelik maak, die assegai wonde. Ek het nou, one of these men, is nou ons men of hulle men. This had happened while the animals were grazing near the Nook-up of the slopes of the Windberg under the care of 3 men, one armed with a musket and the other with short flintlocks. One of these men had been wounded in the shoulder, one merely had his sleeve torn, and the third was killed by 5 assegai wounds. So dit is een van dis een van die maatskappy se soldate, klink dit vir my. Under the care of 3 men, hulle gee nie baie duidelik, hulle sê net 3 men, ek neem aan as maatskappy soldate. Ek is nie heeltemal seker nie. Jy sien, dis hoe koffie werk. As hy begin leeg raak, moet jy hom plat slaan. Anders is hy nie meer lekker nie. Ek val 'n bietjie oor my woorde vanaand. Dis 'n eiland, Robben eiland, skaapkraal. Ag, dis nou maar net administrasie en goed. Die mense wat daar wil gaan saam lees, julle ken mos nou maar die storie. Hulle is besig om, the sheep shed has been blown down, daar's drama daar en daai tipe goed. Ek gaan so half hier oorspring, jy weet, daar's nog baie om deur te gaan. Die groot storie van Oedasoa, hier's nog 'n aanval. Very stormy weather this morning with heavy rain, hail and strong northwesterly wind, with which the Kaapmans returned from the island. Because of the fierce surf and because she had lost her rudder and as could be seen from far off, she could not enter the Rogge Bay. Wat sê hulle van Rogge Bay? This is the first time mention is made of this place, which now forms part of the reclaimed land in Table Bay. It is not certain whether this little bay deprived its name from the fish caught by the Dutch rog, or from rog meaning rye. So Rogge Bay is, kom maar terug om my kaart op. Ons was net al gepraat, hierso is, as jy my cursor kan sien, hierso is die Windberg, Duivels Piek, so dit is net so 'n spoegie. Ons het nog nie ver ingegaan nie, die hele Tafelberg lê hier. Hierdie is omtrent die area waar die maatskappy nou beheer, tot by die Soutrivier, waar die Varsrivier en die Soutrivier by mekaar kom. So, nou sê hulle, Rogge Bay is deel van die reclaimed area. Daar's baie land reclamation gedoen, en hierdie driehoekie wat hier lê. So Rogge Bay moet daar, weet baie naby aan die fort wees. En dit is sy storie. But was obliged to lie in the roadstead beyond the jetty with 2 anchors to hold her. Okay, hier kom die nannas nou. Ek wil net gou hier, my kamera maak staan op sy eie, anders te gaan ons weer oor mekaar val vanaand. Sy, dat is aansienlik beter. Shortly after noon, Duman with 50 or 60 Hottentots made an attack on the company's and Harman's plough oxen. This took place during a heavy downpour, which was so blinding that one could not see 5 roods before one. The scene of the raid was in the company's orchard, hard by the company's granary and near the bridge opposite Harman's dwelling. Harman, who was close to the bridge, drove his oxen over into safety, but 29 of the company's plough oxen were stolen and 4 killed in the driving off. Because of the rainy weather, our soldiers could get no more than 2 or 3 shots at the robbers, and these the scoundrels succeeded in dodging, a trick at which they are most adept. The Hottentots drove the cattle so hard along the slopes of the Windberg and thence down over the Brakrivier. Wat sê hulle van die Brakrivier? Die Soutrivier, okay. Slightly to the north of Jan Reindersen house, that none of our men or the freeburgers who were ready for action could catch up with them to cut them off there or anywhere else. Indeed, if our men had not been at hand so promptly, the whole herd would have been lost, since fully 20 Hottentots had at once fallen upon the cattle, while the rest had drawn themselves up in formation to ward off our men. But our men, though handicapped by the wet weather, managed a shot or 2, so that the robbers dared not hold their ground. They were thus driven off in flight, and our men recovered the best part of the oxen, excluding the 29 mentioned. If it had been dry, all the oxen would have been recaptured, and probably some Hottentots would have been killed as well. As it was, no effect was observed, except that one of the Hottentots had dropped his assegai when our men fired, and another was hit by a shot that had been fired. He rolled over 3 or 4 times down the mountainside. Whether he got up again or whether he was carried away by his people, nobody knows. The other one fled away to safety, and it is not known whether he is seriously or only slightly wounded. This is also in agreement with the reports of the fiscal, who, on receiving the news, immediately rode out to the scene of the incident and ascertained the details. Okay, hier is nog 'n stukkie van die skapejag. Jy sien, as dit oorlog is ons besig om te verloor. Die 19de Junie 1659. Jy praat oor die veekraal. Kom ons lees maar hier deur. Dit gaan oor die oorlog. Today the kraal of stout poles and logs placed close to one another, which is to serve as a palisade along one of the company's granary was practically completed so that the cattle can remain there in safety during the night. All of the company's cattle and most of his sheep were taken there, and all the sheep and cattle of the free burghers were added to these and entrusted to the honourable company so that all might be protected there under the company's guards and go out to graze together during the day. Okay, ek gaan weer die desktop aansit hier. Nou hierso is die grote skuur. En hierso is die korenhoop radou, so dit moet nou hier ergens wees. Ek dink dis dalk hier by grote skuur rond, waar hulle dryf al die vee hier in. Ek gaan nou nie deur alles lees nie, hulle is besig om, al hulle vee gekonsolideer, die vryburgers en die maatskappy se vee, konsolideer hulle, en hulle bring dit daar na grote skuur toe. Permission has been granted the free burghers. Jy sien, baie keer ek neem aan hierdie moet 'n fout wees. Permission has been granted the free burghers, seker to the free burghers, to fetch from this joint herd whenever necessary, such of their cattle as they require for their farming, on the understanding that they do so at their own risk. This proviso is necessary because then the cattle graze in many different places, each herd guarded by only a small subdivision of men available. The cattle cannot be so securely protected as now, with all our men concentrated in a joint force at the place where all the cattle are. It is trusted that with this agreement, the Hottentots will not be able to make so many attempts on our cattle. So ons kan net verdedig op die oomblik. En julle gaan nou sien hoe desperaat raak die storie nou. Want hulle weet nie wat om te doen nie. Want hulle is definitief uit oorlê. Die Kaapmans ken die area hopeloos te goed. Jy is nou op 'n ander man se grond hierso. En hulle ken die area verskillik goed. Hulle lê jou net oor, hulle uit oorlê jou. Hulle gaan vir Harry vrylaat. Check hierdie. The cattle which we still have left include many fine young animals which bid fair to be ready for pulling the plough by next year. As a result of arrangements for which the most recent and detailed instructions were issued only yesterday, it is hoped that these animals will be effectively guarded. Further, it is estimated that in addition to the existing body, some 30 or 40 men could be raised from the free burghers, etc., to seek contact with the Kaapmans in their encampment. So far, we have been unable to capture anyone whom we might induce by force or other means to show us where the Kaapmans are encamped. Wherefore, after protracted deliberations, it has been finally decided to fetch Harry from the island and make use of him, closely guarded for this purpose. We will make him golden promises without binding ourselves, of course. As the weather is fine, a rowing boat is to be sent there to fetch him immediately after these deliberations. Okay, julle gaan nou sien, dit raak nou. Nou gaan dit interessant raak. Want hier kom Oedasoa en die Kotjokwas nou in die prentjie in. Ek is nou al by 8:15. Dis tyd vir 'n smoke break. Tyd vir 'n smoke break. Ek is bly ek het hierdie in 2 dele opgedeel. Waar wil ek wees? Hi. Daar is 'n helikopter skuins bokant jou huis. Dis omdat jy vir Klipkop kyk. Hulle wil nie hê hierdie inligting moet in die samelewing uitgaan nie. Hulle wil nie hê die Suid-Afrikaanse burgers moet weet van ons alliansie met Oedasoa nie. Kom kyk, wat het ek gemis? Nie veel nie. Domina Morgul het die chopper jou kom oplei. Mike Simpson sê, is die cops wat jou soek. Domina Morgul is mos ergens in die UK, Ierland dink ek. Daar somewhere. Dis 'n drug bust, het jy drugs in jou huis, Domina? Flash gou al die tik by die toilet af. Mike Simpson says, shoot first, ask questions later. Ons gaan nou sien hoekom shoot first and ask questions later is dalk nie die beste plan nie. Want jy sien, daar is wel verskillende stamme, en die stamme stem nie met mekaar saam nie. En ons sal nou sien hier met die Oedasoa besigheid. Domina sê, sy het niks drugs by haar nie, nie eers 'n groen blommetjie nie. Klink so eensaam haar by Domina. Frek, hoes, jy wil mos rok. Klim op die dak en waai vir hulle. Tel my op. Vat my groen dakkies toe. Okay. Ek sit mors nou julle tyd. Die 12 viewers wat ek het, so kyk hoe ook nou 'n sigaret. Ek is vanaand in slow mode. Okay, let's go. Oedasoa. Ek neem aan hierdie Oedasoa ding gaan 'n baie belangrike gebeurtenis wees. Dis net RSA baan wat my wifi wil kom leen. Hy wil ook saam kyk. Righto. Immediately after this resolution was taken, the fiscal Gabema went out on horseback to see, as was his daily custom, that everything was in order. When he came to the furthest spur of the Windberg, one of the fisherman's servants came hurrying up the mountain from the river to warn him that some Hottentots, though he did not know how many, had made their appearance and were boldly advancing. The fisherman's wife had already fled to the Rideau Duinhoop, which was nearby. From there the news had also been brought to us at the fort, whereupon all the necessary orders for defence were given, and from the cat the commander saw the Hottentots, who at the distance appeared to be about 20 strong. Being approached by the fiscal on horseback, accompanied by the fisherman's servant, and so some musketeers and the groom, all mounted, were sent after him. But before they had gone a quarter of the way, we saw him through a telescope advancing with the Hottentots and some cattle, rounding the high sand dune besides the Salt River. The assumption was that he had captured them, but when he reached the fort, we discovered that the truth was even more satisfactory. Praise be to God! What Eva had consistently predicted has come to pass. There were 7 Hottentots with 15 sheep, specially sent by Eva's brother-in-law, Oedasoa, the chieftain of the mighty Kochokwas. After they had been welcomed and delivered themselves of the following speech. Okay, nou hier is nou die boodskap wat die Kotjok was vir ons stuur. Firstly, their chief offered and assured us of his steadfast and unchanging peace and closer alliance, although the Kaapmans had done their best to dissuade him. Some weeks ago, just before the recent wet and stormy weather, the Kaapmans and also the Gorochohoekwas or tobacco thieves had brought to Oedasoa and his confer Ngonomua presents of copper and tobacco, and had asked Oedasoa to assist him to move inland so as to avoid suffering injury at the hands of the Dutch people at any time, or being captured and imprisoned in the fort. They had also assured us of many evil things in order to entice Oedasoa against us and make him despise us. But he and Ngonomua had refused to believe the Kaapmans, had spurned the offer and their presence, and had sent them packing, although Ngonomua, who was covetous, would have liked to accept them. All the members of Oedasoa's tribe who were living among the Gorochohoekwas had thus been summoned home to prevent their suffering injury or accident should these tobacco thieves be attacked by the Dutch. Upon this we assured them that we were most pleased at their prudent action, for we should have been deeply concerned if we had learned that any of them had come to harm while in the company of these rascals. Continuing their speech, they said that Ngonomua had allowed himself to be so frightened by the Kaapmans' talk that he had raised objections to the sending of men to the fort, and had warned Oedasoa that he should be on his guard in any such undertaking. Their discussion of this matter had become so heated that Oedasoa had told him that he should take himself off with the portions of the tribe and the livestock which were his, and that he would take care of himself. Oedasoa was quite capable of looking after his own, for he was old and wise enough and needed no advice from him how to wage war or to conclude and maintain peace. So they had in fact split up. Ngonomua had decided to watch the turn of events and keep himself aloof, but not in any way whatever helping our enemies, the Kaapmans or the Gorochohoekwas, or listening to them. If he saw everything going well, he would resume the same friendly relations with the Dutch that had previously existed. But in confirmation of what Eva had often previously declared, they said that Oedasoa had remained determined to send his people to us to find out how things were going here at the Cape and whether the commander really intended making war against the Kaapmans, so that Oedasoa could have something definite to go on and have further discussions with a view to bring about the ruin of these Kaapmans. In order that he might feel more assured on this point, he therefore requested that his sister-in-law Eva, as well as some Dutchmen, should accompany his people on their return to him. He promised to see to it that not a hair on their heads would be touched, and that they would not be injured in any way, that he would then come with 10 or 12 huts to the foot of the Leopard Mountain on the other side of the salt pans, and that he would send to the fort in person his chief and favorite wife, Eva's sister, accompanied by our envoys under a strong escort. She could then convey to us his own words and confirm his assurance, which he for his past gave, that matters could be so arranged by cooperation that the Kaapmans and tobacco thieves would not much longer be able to cause such disturbances and have things so much their own way. He added that we should meanwhile keep a close watch and see that that the Kaapmans stole as few cattle as possible and not worry about those we had already lost. He considered that we should be able to acquire twice as many as we had lost, and said that he would make so many available by means of barter that we should not be in want, for he was glad that we had become enemies of the Kaapmans, and hoped that we would never again contemplate making peace with them. He for his part had not succeeded in maintaining peace with them, since these scoundrels were unaccustomed to keeping the peace for long, not being able to live or remain content without committing robbery and murder. Hierdie kan maar ek weer ondersteun. Waar was ek nou? Were unaccustomed to keeping the peace for long, not being able to live or remain content without committing robbery and murder. They were constantly attempting to overpower someone or other when at his weakest and most unprepared. Oedasoa himself had experienced such attacks, just as we had, after he had been beaten by another tribe from far inland. After this tribe had attacked him in his encampment, he had been powerless to do anything except take to flight and hide himself somewhere with the few people and cattle that still remained to him. At this point, the Kaapmans had not only robbed him of most of his remaining cattle, but had killed and miserably murdered all who could not defend themselves, even including women and children. They had even split open the pregnant woman and trampled on their unborn children. This had happened to them shortly before we came to settle at the Cape, and he could never forget it, though after regaining their previous strength and recovering from their wounds, they would long ago have taken revenge if it had not been for the fear that we were in too close alliance with them, since we lived on their land. On this land, Oedasoa had said he hoped henceforth to establish free access in peace and amity and trade with us Hollanders, and so supplant these mischievous rogues. Daar word julle, ek het nog hulle 'n notaatjie hier langs die kant gemaak. Fok! They had even split open the pregnant woman and trampled on the unborn children. We pretended that all the above met with our approval, and the envoys were well entertained. Their presence also aroused great encouragement amongst all the burghers and free farmers, for they considered that now they had a chance once more to acquire plenty of additional livestock and to re-establish themselves. These envoys also reported that Oedasoa had collected some rhinoceros horns for us. They had also captured a quagga with the intention of sending it alive to the commander, but the assegai wound had been deeper than they had thought, and it had died. Nevertheless, Oedasoa hoped to obtain another one, perhaps more than one, but this could not be done immediately, because he had a wound in the elbow inflicted by a lion, so that he was confined to his hut as if he were, as they put it, a woman. As far as ivory was concerned, after further discussion and after coming to an understanding and forming a close alliance with us, he would, at a suitable time, try to get some by sending his men into the interior. So dit gaan nou oor quagga jag, ons dryf nou 'n bietjie verder van die oorlog af. The envoys were told that if it pleased their chief Oedasoa to come to the fort, we would send a wagon to fetch him, and a suitable house would be provided for him where he could be cured by our surgeons. As far as food and drink were concerned, he would receive as generous treatment as he could desire. Eva interpreted this offer to them, and they replied that when they reached Oedasoa's encampment, accompanied by her and by our men, they would tell him of the goodwill we had shown them and the offers we had made, and persuade him to accept them. Through Eva, they were asked whether they would at the same time point through Efa, they were asked whether they would at the same time point out to us where the Kaapmans and their encampment, as we would send along so many soldiers that we might, it was hoped, give these robbers a sound drubbing, so that we might prove to Oedasoa's father satisfaction how serious we were in our opposition to the Kaapmans. Hierdie vertaling is vir my op party plekke nie baie lekker nie. Dalk lees ek net nie ordentlik nie. They replied that they had no orders in this regard, but they could state, among other things, that we could rest assured that when Oedasoa heard what they had to tell, he would consider these means sufficient and would direct us to the enemy and inform us how to bring about the total destruction of these men, who had been their enemies for so long, and had recently become our enemies as well. They advised us in the meantime to content ourselves with keeping a sharp lookout against further loss and discomfiture, urging us to have a little patience and not to be over anxious to take the offensive. When they were shown Dumaan's large assegai and some others which we had obtained in various encounters, the envoy said that was proof enough for their assurance, and the sight of these trophies they appeared to be on the point of jumping for joy. They proceeded to tell us how deeply it grieved Oedasoa that these scoundrels had made off with the cattle which he in such a friendly spirit of goodwill had given us in barter. They advised us to have patience and harden our hearts against the Kaapmans. So resolutely that like Oedasoa, it would refuse ever to soften in favor of them, but rather remained hard as iron. The envoys were sure that if Oedasoa noticed that, he would have some plan in mind and would reveal it to us and would reveal it to us and so convince us that these rogues would swiftly be exterminated, and with his friendship and alliance we would be able to trade with his people in a perfectly friendly relationship and live in as much security as can be desired. Baie lang stuk. Sjoe. My keel is nou eintlik seer. Wag, byt vas. Vir julle daar sit. Ek val lekker oor, ek weet nie of die ou dronk was toe hy hierdie stukke vertaal het, of ek net vanaand dronk is nie. Daar's party van daai sinne, maak dit nie vir my sin nie, maar ek lees reg. Charles Zilli, Nancy meneer, maande laas op jou live gewees. Hoe gaan dit nog met jou klub? Nee, het gaan alright. Ek lees net Jan van Riebeeck, ek is half naar van politiek. Ek luister deesdae Silverchair en Learn to Hate. Take your time to learn to hate. Come and join the mass debate. Politiek laat jou ander mense haat. Ek wil nie ander mense haat nie. Ok. Ek gaan gou 'n eentjie weer laat, net so halfpad rook. Dan kan ons hom nog 'n stuk, want hier kom nog 'n lang leesstuk aan. Hulle bly nogal uit oor hierdie hele Oedasoa storie. Of wat sê julle van wat hulle die dragtende moeders oopgesny en op die kinders gespring, op daardie onontwikkelde babas. Half ontwikkelde, joh. Okay. Dan skiep ons maar die. Maak hier die eentjie dood. Skiep ons maar die rest van die eentjie. Okay. Oedasoa Alliansie. Hier is nou nog 'n aanval. During the night, news reached the fort that the Hottentots had attempted to break into the house of the freeburger Otto under cover of darkness and to murder the whole household, but that Otto's people had woken up and had fired upon them. The thieves had escaped, but by a stroke of misfortune and quite accidentally, Otto had been shot in the calf by his own comrade Jacob Roosendaal. The wound had been caused by the 5 pellets with which one of the guns had been loaded. The fiscal and surgeon were sent to him to dress the wound and gather further particulars about the incident. So die enigste mense wat ons raak skiet is ons eie mense. Mense, hierdie oorlog gaan nie goed nie. Het gaan nie baie goed nie. Okay, hier kom ons nou weer by Harry. Ons het nog gesê, die ding is, daar was nou 'n lang leesstuk, maar daar is nog nie 'n dag verby gegaan nie. Hier is nou baie informasie. Yesterday afternoon, quite early, the rowing boat arrived at the jetty with Harry on board, but since Oedasoa's people were all here and Eva knew nothing about his having been summoned or his arrival, we had him immediately taken back to the islands for various reasons without allowing him on land. Het gaan nou snaaks lyk as hulle nou vir Harry daar aanbring, hulle is nou in oorlog met hierdie mense en Harry is nou die original scoundrel en vir daardie redes het hulle nou maar vir hom teruggestuur. Hulle sê hier in die onderkant ergens dat Harry moet seker nou baie de mekaar wees. Hy weet nie wat gaan aan nie, maar dis moet nou ongelukkig so wees. Hoor jy, hoe gaan het op Robben Eiland? The sheep on the island, which had numbered over 500, have now been reduced by death to a mere 100. En hulle het mos die ander man, wat sy naam nou weer? Die vorige ou, het hulle gefeier, omdat daar, jy weet, hulle is nou nie heeltemal seker altyd oor die skaapie. Kyk hoe gaan het nou, met ryk overhagen nou in die helm. Oedasoa, the same fine weather in the morning as on the 2 previous days. The aforementioned envoys requested, through Eva, to have further discussions in some private place with the commander and the members of his council, in order to communicate their chief's further messages. Having been received before the council, they continued as follows. Oedasoa has instructed to us to suggest that the Dutch captain should never again make peace with the Kaapmans or tobacco thieves. To this we replied that if Oedasoa had the same good intentions toward us as we had towards him, we should willingly promise this. They replied, that is good, and we give you Oedasoa's personal assurance that he has no other object but to help to destroy the Kaapmans completely, since they have fully deserved it from both sides and was related yesterday. They gave us a further reason that whenever our people had travelled inland to visit Oedasoa with the Kaapmans acting as guides, the latter had always requested Oedasoa to deliver our people up to them, especially the late ensign Jan van Riebeeck. But Oedasoa had always replied that they were rascals and that on the contrary he intended that our people should be safely escorted back to the fort without having a thread of their clothes damaged. They said that the Kaapmans were especially aggrieved that the commander had sent men and wagons with presents to Oedasoa, which they and their followers would like to prevent by means of war. But if we were sincere in our intentions never to make peace with them without Oedasoa's knowledge, there was every chance of driving them all into such an effective trap that not one of them could escape. We said yes, and to make them even better disposed, we declared that we dared no longer delay destroying them, for our Heavenly Father, whom Eva was learning to know, but about whom the robbers were totally ignorant and had no desire to learn, would punish us, since the blood of his people, which these villains had so murderously shed, cried out to him for vengeance. Hence we were in duty bound to apply ourselves so thoroughly to this task as to hunt them down without ceasing. Daar is wat Domina Morgul van die begin af wou gehoor het. They replied that it was Oedasoa. They replied that that is what Oedasoa expects to hear from the commander, and that it is the reason why he sent us his envoys. As die kamera net wil regop staan. They added that they were also to inform the commander that the kindness of the Dutch had become so well to all the inhabitants, even far into the interior, that everyone was eager to see them or visit them. This the Kaapmans had always tried to prevent by every possible means, but when the commander's present declaration became generally known, we should find that everyone would try from time to time to bring whatever the interior had to offer, if only these tribes, even including the far-off Chobonas, knew what we wanted, for according to the envoys, the good name of the Hollanders had already spread far and wide. Whereupon we told them that we had long tried to get into touch with a great chief like this, with whom we could conclude a firm alliance, and one whom we should like to supply by means of barter with everything he and all the inhabitants of the interior desired. We should also bear in mind that whatever we did not have on hand, we could order to be brought by ships from Holland, India, and all parts of the world. The envoys answered that Oedasoa had long desired this, but that he had always been misled by the Kaapmans. It was now his intention, however, upon hearing the said word of the commander, to come and settle here with his people and replace the Kaapmans, and to furnish us with as much livestock as we desired. He would thus gratefully enjoy those benefits which the Kaapmans had shared ungratefully for so long, and which, in keeping, as their messenger said, with their scoundrelly character, they villainously repaid with robbery and murder. When Oedasoa became a close neighbor, he would come and pay personal visits to the commander from time to time to receive such friendly treatment from the Hollanders as is shared between two brothers whose hearts beat as one. Oh, nou maak hulle die pap om dik aan, jong. They declared that this was Oedasoa's intention, and that as the agreement was now adequately confirmed, they begged that they might depart immediately with a wagon and as many men as the commander was disposed to send with them, in order that the mission now being concluded from both sides, further negotiations might be conducted as to joint independent action to be taken to deal with the Kaapmans. Through Eva, we informed them that the fiscal had already gone out to fetch a wagon and some people to return with them, as they had requested. They were, however, most insistent on departing forthwith, since Oedasoa would otherwise be left too long in suspense. We made clear to them the impossibility of being ready and earlier than any earlier than tomorrow morning, because our people were scattered far and wide, keeping a lookout upon the Kaapmans, and could not return home before evening. Moreover, all the wagons were out in the fields. En ek hierdie is, ek kan dalk oor die laaste stukkie skiep. Hier kom nog baie. Kom ek lees maar deur. We added that we would like to make arrangements for sending a handsome presentation to Oedasoa. Hulle is nou net besig om mekaar se gatte te lek. Benefiting of the great chief. Hulle is nou baie opgewonde. Hierdie alliansie het nou, en ek is seker hulle is opgewonde met 'n rede. Ek het tog dit op die camera gesit, die mense wat wil lees kan saam lees. Moreover, we consider that Oedasoa's offer of closer and more permanent alliance must of sheer necessity be accepted. And we have not for one moment entertained the idea of rejecting it or letting his invoice return home without assurances of our willingness in that respect. Furthermore, his power is too great for us to oppose it, and it would be too costly for the honourable company. Okay, so hierdie deal is nou definitief gesluit. Hulle is nou so half in mekaar se gatte opgekruip, smaak dit my. Wherefore, for these and many other weighty and extremely urgent reasons, it has been agreed and resolved after due deliberation in the circumstances to accept Oedasoa's offer of closer and firmer alliance with every token of goodwill. Okay, daar is dit nou net officieel gestuit en dit is definitief wat gebeur. His request must also be granted, namely that the returning invoice be accompanied by his sister-in-law, the interpreter Eva, whom the Goringahikwas claimed we had put in chains and were keeping as our prisoner here, and also that we should send with the same confidence as he had in sending men to us, as many of our own people, or as few, for it was indifferent to him, as we pleased, in order by means of Eva's reliable interpretation to confirm with him and to hear and give full consideration to his further plans and proposals for the overthrow of the Goracho-Hukwas and Goringahikwas for our common foe. Sjoe, magtig. Ek gaan net so, die mense wat nog hierdeur wil lees, hulle maak nou al hierdie arrangements en goed, ek het hier onderstreep, wherefore our men have been given instructions to pay their due respects to Oedasoa, to hand him the gifts, and then to make the following declaration on our behalf. Okay, dis nou die storiekie wat ons nou vir Oedasoa terugspin. Hy stuur mos nie mense na, hy kom ons nie self na die fort toe nie, hy stuur mense na die fort toe. Nou hier is die boodskap wat teruggestuur word, that we greatly appreciate the first embassy from him to us and his offers of a closer alliance, and that we accordingly wish to reciprocate in no small measure. We therefore decided not only to allow his sister-in-law Eva to return with his invoice, but also our deputies to assure him of our goodwill towards him. As a token of this, the commander has had these presents conveyed to him, with the request that he should be so good as to accept them as from his own brother, who is at one with him in heart and mind. Further, that we should allow our men to return home with an answer as soon as possible, just as we allowed his. His answer might be sent by means of deputies, or he might come in person to conduct further discussions with the commander. That we should be very glad if he saw fit to send out some of his people, either alone or in the company of a few of our soldiers, in order to search and spy out where we could come upon our common foe, and that if he could point out where they were, he would soon discover how serious we were in our intention to injure them in every possible manner. Okay, so dit is nou natuurlijk wat moet gebeur. Die Oedasoa se mense moet gaan uitvind waar die Kaapmans bly, want ons ken die area net nie goed genoeg nie. Die Kaapmans is hopeloos te slinks, hulle kruip orals weg, hulle steek kuddes vee, steek hulle weg, ons weet nie waar het is nie. Ergens tussen 'n paar bossies, ons kry dit nie. So ons het definitief die hulp nodig van Oedasoa se mense, wat natuurlik ook die area ken. If he were to suggest an immediate attack upon the enemy with these 13 men and some of his own people, our envoys should politely and tactfully make the excuse that an attack would at present be inadvisable with such a small force, and that they had not been given the authority for such an undertaking. Our men were to listen to Oedasoa's plans of attack, replying to everything that they would report the same to the commander. Either personally or by means of deputies, he could then treat further with the commander, and he could freely allow his people to come to the fort straight away for the purpose of bartering with their cattle. From various points of view, it was considered inadvisable at present for the council to agree to the sending of trade missions to the interior. But clearly on the journal has a marginal note to this effect that this was not to be mentioned to Oedasoa. Instead, our men should see if they could arrange matters so that these tribesmen always bring their cattle to the fort. In this way, the chance of any possible dangers which we feared might be reduced to a minimum, and that the security of our people would be the greater. There are many other important reasons as well. Thus resolved and determined in the fort of Goede Hoop on the above date Jan van Riebeeck, Roelof de Man, Abraham Gabbema, Pieter Everards en Gysbert van Kampen. Mense, ek het nou eers genoeg gehad. En ek het ook nie verder gelees nie. So as ek nou verder lees, dan gaan julle, het is so letterlik. My genade Geert, hoe is jy dan so laat vanaand? Goedenavond, ons bondgenoot uit die Laagland. Goedenavond uit die groter Nederland. Daai gevoel wanneer my lui Sondag aand in 'n rustige Ierse dorpie meer eventvol is as van Riebeeck se reiswoord. Ek weet nie wat hier gebeur in hierdie reiswoord nie, maar dit is nou waar die nannas nou kom. Die eerste regte oorlog, ten minste is almal wat die storie volg 100% seker oor hoe die hele besigheid geontwikkel het oor die episodes. Want ek sien daar so is mense wat, hulle is baie lief om, jy weet, sekere deeltjies uit te sny, jy weet, om 'n sekere narratief te skep. En hierso het ons al die konteks. Spitsvondigheid. Ek doen die tuin, slang, ek doen die tuin, slang. Dis 'n lekker nummer daai. Hoor die mense, ek dink ek gaan dit dan net daar so los. Baie dankie vir julle wat ingeskakel het, vir die mense wat 'n bietjie laat gekom het, uit die Laagland uit. Julle moet maar net terugspeel en weer die storie loop kyk. Ek wil vir julle sê, baie dankie dat julle ingeskakel het. Onthou, daar is absoluut geen skaamte daarin om jou kop uit jou gat uit te trek nie. Staan op vir daardie mense wat vir jou opstaan. En soos altyd, volhard en hou koers.